Hello out there. Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan, and together we are going through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year. We read a little bit every day. Today we're going to be reading Genesis 25, verses 1 through 11. We'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we'll be discussing what we read. So let's get started. And Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimron, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begot Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were the Asherim, and the Letushim, and the Lemumim. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, and Epher, and Enoch, and Abida, and Eldah. And all these were the sons of Keturah. And Abraham gave everything he had to Isaac. And to the sons of Abraham's concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still alive, and sent them away from Isaac his son eastward to the land of the east. And these are the days of the years of the life of Abraham which he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died at a ripe old age, old and sated with years, and he was gathered to his kinfolk. And Isaac and Ishmael his sons buried him in the Machpelah cave in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, which faces Mamre, the field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it happened after Abraham's death that God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled near Beer Lahai Roi. So a short little passage, but it does wrap up the loose ends of Abraham. Now, there's a lot of questions regarding this section. First of all, you have the taking another wife, speculation as to when this in fact took place. What is your opinion? Do you believe that this is actually chronologically after Rebecca, or do you think this is just kind of taking us back and filling in a gap?
For Sarah. Uh, uh,
Well,
Well,
after
after
no,
no,
I
I mean,
mean, but after Rebecca, in terms of after he found Rebecca.
oh, I see. Uh, I think you could make a case that once Abraham uh, begot uh, Isaac, that he continued to have the ability to do that, and so he took Keturah late in life. She was probably quite a bit younger. That is, I think, a case you could make that maybe once he was given that, you know, uh, and that potency again, he continued and took a wife, and then you have the sons of the concubines. In effect, Keturah, I think, had been a concubine. You in Chronicles, I believe she's called a concubine. So she may have been originally a servant and then became a wife. So her status had at one time been as a servant, and then he elevated her and married her. But she's called, I think, a concubine in Chronicles, which would indicate a prior status, not as a prior inferior status, maybe. He had servants as his servant. His one of his servants said, God has blessed him with servants, plural. If you remember what Daniel read earlier. So it's possible then that he had, in a sense, two concubines that Keturah and Hagar, and so the descendants of them were sent away eastward, so that Isaac would the son of the covenant would be separated from them. But on the other hand, he gave them gifts. He took care of them, but he also made sure there was a separation between them and Isaac. Um, so that's at least one way to look at it. I know some people want to say that this is not chronological because if Abraham was so old that it was a miracle that begat Isaac, begot Isaac. How could he then have Keturah later? But if it happened earlier, the question would be at what point
Hmm.
that he did that. And I guess that's why the Jews, some rabbinical tradition said Keturah was another name for Hagar.
Hmm.
I don't think that's the case, but that is a common Jewish tradition that Keturah is another name for Hagar.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you take the approach that this is chronologically correct, that this happened after the death of Sarah, then what it could speak to is a principle which would be helpful to have, and that is that when your wife dies, there's nothing inappropriate about taking another one. And specifically, if you have the situation where you have the potency sort of situation where Abraham is able to continue to have children, that would imply a certain amount of sexual interest, and therefore he really should take another wife, uh, just for the sake of avoiding any sort of inappropriate behavior. So it would model a positive thing, and I do think it's a positive thing within our community. You know, when a wife dies, when a man is able to take on another wife, because often there are women in their older age that are could use the companionship and the sexual satisfaction, all of those things from another person, and there's no reason why they should have to go without it, because it doesn't dishonor the memory of the person. I think so. You could, I would be inclined to want to say that it's chronological for that reason, because it would serve a purpose, morally a little bit easier to me, like why it's here if it's that. One thing that's interesting though is that you don't really hear a whole lot about Keturah as a person, and yet she's spoken about with Midian, right? And so there's obviously a lot of importance in that, if that is in fact the same Midian, which I believe most people would say it is, right?
And it's very significant that in verse 9, Isaac and Ishmael, whatever their tensions might have existed between them, they come together to bury their father. You know, and the fifth commandment is honor your father and your mother. And they came together to bury their father. And perhaps this helped to reconcile the two brothers. So, as I said, I always bring this up. It reminds me in recent history of the Abraham Accords, where various Arab nations have been making peace with Israel recently. Uh, it's not so much that they were at war, but there was just a hostility which is now, at least for the time being, ended. Uh, and it kind of goes back to this concept that, Isaac and Ishmael both go back to Abraham. But other people here are mentioned too. Abraham was going to be the father of many nations, and various names are mentioned here that became ethnic groups, as such as the Midianites, evidently. And so they do. Abraham did have an impact on the, you know, on the let's say geopolitics of and history in terms of descendants of his that grew into ethnic groups.
And to the to point of where if you want to feel too bad about these other people because Isaac got everything. Well, again, if you have the Midianites, they are in the lineage of Moses with Zipporah and everything, right? So there's a role for them to play as well. It all comes out in the end, kind of thing. Now, speaking coming on the end, you have the verse and it says Abraham died. Robert Alter translates it sated with years. It isn't very common in the Bible to have this sort of thing, because often you kind of get sort of negative things that happen towards the end of people's lives. Like you have with, Noah has a really bad thing towards the end. You have Isaac who has a negative experience. So Abraham is a a person who had was able to die very content, which is something that is not always so common. But on the other hand, I would say it does speak to the greater principle. And that's where you get to these other things like the gathering to his kinfolk, right? Because people want to read a lot into that as speaking to perhaps something like the resurrection. And personally, I don't really have an issue with that from a typology standpoint, because yes, a righteous person can die, sated with their years, and eventually we will be gathered to our kinfolk, as it were. Totally, totally fine. I don't believe Abraham is currently resurrected this moment. However, even if you want to take it literally, you could say that to him, he was in that moment, if you want to take it that way, and that doesn't bother me. What comes to your mind when you see those verses?
Well, to me, gathered to his kinfolk, just dust we are, dust we shall return,
No, much
and,
darker version of it.
oh yeah, I just gather to your kinfolk. Yeah, I don't take it. I don't take it as implying immortality, as the traditional Jewish approach has been. That this somehow implies immortality. I think it's just a poetic way of saying that he died and in fact joined his ancestors in death.
I mean, that's true. I think there is something beautiful about that, the rest in peace. But I really take it more like Titanic, where we're jumping. The person dies in their sleep peacefully, and now we've jumped to what happens next for them. And that doesn't imply that, therefore, that actually happened chronologically to us then, but we're just really seeing his whole picture. That's how I take it. Maybe it's a little too artistic, but.
I would like to comment. I would like to comment on the 11th verse. It's interesting. Isaac is living in the place where God had appeared to Hagar,
Mm.
a significant location. There had been a theophany there earlier to Ishmael's mother, interestingly, and now we have Isaac there. He's there earlier too. He's there when Rebecca sees him. Right? I think he's coming from there then.
And when you have that as the first theophany mentioned in the Bible, and we think of it as the pre incarnate Jesus Christ, and Isaac is a type of Christ, well, it all just blends in very nicely, doesn't it?
Okay.
Rolling right along. So, any other thoughts on this section?
No.
All right. So if you want to keep in touch with us, feel free to comment below and ask us questions. We love to hear comments. We'll certainly speak to them as we keep moving forward. And you know where we're going, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, share this with your friends, anybody who you think would be interested in it. And we will see you tomorrow.